Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's track guide for the IRO4. We are going to Oran Park in beautiful, sunny Australia. Unfortunately, this track no longer exists in real life because I personally love tracks like this. It's tight, it's technical, there's elevation change. It's a difficult track. It's not a Grand Prix track, which isn't to say that Grand Prix tracks aren't difficult, but you get what I'm saying. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the lap before we dive into the details. One quick note is that All right, and before we dive in too far, I do just want to say please check out the description below for a bunch of great links, including telemetry for this lap on Garage 61, a link to my Discord, my Twitch channel, which is twitch.tv/elgato and if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so now. It helps me as I try to grow this channel. But let's go ahead and break down the lap. Before we go too far, let's take a look at the track conditions. We have a 27 degrees Celsius track with 26-degree air temperature and moderately low usage at 35%. If these numbers are lower, it's easier to go faster. If these numbers are higher, it's harder to go faster. As for the laps, I did a ton of laps. I really love Oran Park. I was having a ton of fun trying to find little bits of lap time here and there. Eventually, I knew I can get into the 102s and I wanted to do that. And I hit this 102.9 and I thought, hey, let's go a little bit faster. And we did it with the 102.8. However, the 102.825 is a little bit of a dirty lap. We did get an off track there. The rest of the lap is actually really smooth. We are going to analyze this 102.913, which is a clean lap, but there are a couple corners that weren't quite as smooth, and I'll talk about why that is when we get to those. But let's go ahead and take a look at the lap. We're going to treat turns 1 and 2 as essentially one corner, with the apex of turn 1 acting as our braking marker for turn 2. As for turn 1, we're going to turn in right at the end of the green wall on this main straight, and we're going to head towards that apex, brake at the apex, and try to keep it in a straight line heading in towards turn 2. The trick to everything here is really about this braking phase. We want to get our braking done in a straight line to make it as easy as possible to avoid locking up. If we leave braking too late, we're going to run off into the gravel, and if we do so too early, we're going to be slow. Right around the apex is good for me. If you feel like you're locking them up or not able to make the corner braking at this point, just try braking a little bit before that turn 1 apex, but this straight line braking is really the most important part. We want to brake in a straight line so that we can get maximum brake pressure without getting those lockups. And you might find that you need to do a little bit of pressure adjustment after the braking point, either increasing the pressure or decreasing the pressure depending on how the tires are feeling. After the braking phase, we're really just looking to be patient on turn in, and we want to make sure the car is smooth as we head towards the apex and really kind of hug this apex as much as possible, waiting to see and spot that exit curbing. As soon as that exit curbing comes into view, we can get back on throttle, and you can aggressively push out towards that exit curbing to get a nice launch out of turn 2. Because this entry is so tricky, again, focus on straight line braking and keeping the car under control under braking so that when you turn in, the car is under control and you can get a nice exit out. Turn 3 is a longer, tighter corner than it appears, so one key here is really being patient on throttle for the exit. If you get on throttle too early, it's really easy to run wide, but we'll start braking right around the white tires or the beginning of the entry curbing, and we'll trail off the brakes pretty quickly as we get to the curbing, and we can do a little bit of coasting here. Again, just being patient and waiting for the moment that we can get back on throttle on exit. Two notes for the entry. First, it's bumpy. It's kind of like a street circuit, sort of like Long Beach. So, going over those bumps, it can be very easy to lock it up if you catch one of those bumps just a little bit differently. So, it's best not to push your luck too much here under braking. So, really be patient on the brakes here. If you find you're running a little bit too deep, it's okay, back up your braking point. As for using the entry curbing, I tried that a couple of times and I just found it was way too easy to clip the grass or the dirt and end up locking up the tires and not have a good time there either. So I'm staying on the black tarmac under braking as close to the edge as possible. And again, we're bleeding off the brakes pretty quickly and letting the car kind of just coast and settle in throughout the corner. We're really just looking to maintain momentum through that coasting phase and not push our luck on exit. So when we get back on throttle, we know we're not going to run wide. We'll talk about turns 4 and 5 together as well, because turn 5 is essentially just a continuation of the exit of turn 4. So I'm going to kind of refer to them as one corner. For the braking point, we're going to brake right around the tires on the left hand side, and it's going to be a quick dab of the brakes and a quick trail off. Similar to turn 3, we're going to coast a little bit here to allow the car to really settle in. There's a dip just after we start braking, and if we're too heavy on the brakes as we come over that crest and into that dip, the rear of the car is going to be too light because the weight of the car is going to be on the nose and it's going to want to spin. You can even see here after trailing off the brakes and coasting, the rear of the car is even a little light on exit. So as I get on throttle, those tires are stressed and I have to correct just a little bit, which does cost us a little bit of time. So you can really just see how much pressure we're putting on those rear tires to perform. And kind of taking away some of that pressure by not being too heavy on the brakes going through the corner is going to help alleviate some of that pressure and allow those rear tires to work for us under acceleration on exit. The main key here is really not pushing the entry too hard. Once again, that dip is really the limiting factor. So if we try to leave things too late, if we try to outbrake ourselves, odds are it's going to be very easy to spin or lock up and go off into the gravel. So really take your time on entry. Make sure you keep the car balanced so you can get a nice exit up the hill towards the bridge. Turn 6 is a fairly straightforward corner, but there is a trick here because we are coming to the top of this hill as we go over the bridge, so the car gets light as we hit that crest. Because of that, we need to lift a little bit to allow the car to make its way towards the apex. We want to get to the apex to allow ourselves to get back on throttle aggressively on exit so we can carry a lot of speed through turn 6. If we don't do this lift, we're going to run into a lot of understeer, and odds are we'll even run wide on exit, and that's something we don't want to do. Any lift that we have to do later in the process is going to cause us more time than any lift we do earlier. If you find you're having a hard time getting to the apex or running wide on exit, consider doing that lift just a little bit earlier, or maybe leaving that lift just a little bit longer. But that's the main thing here. Get a nice little lift as you turn in to allow the car to find the apex, and then get aggressively back on throttle to carry a bunch of speed through the exit and towards turn 7. Turn 7 and 8 are pretty connected, so we're going to talk about them together. Again, they're kind of like turns 4 and 5, where turn 8 is essentially just a continuation of the exit of turn 7. And once again, elevation change is the key here because we are dropping in elevation as we head towards the apex of the corner, which means we don't want the weight of the car too far forward. Otherwise, the rear of the car will be too loose and it will be very easy to spin ourselves out. Because of that, we really don't actually use a lot of braking, and once again, we're using a lot of coasting. We'll do a quick dab of the brakes as we approach the change in curbing, and we'll start to turn the car in completely neutral and off the brakes. Again, allowing the car to dip into that compression at the bottom of the hill. Because of that compression, we also don't want the steering wheel cranked too hard. So we're going to have some light steering input at first, and then after we land in that compression and you start to feel the car grip up, you can really turn the wheel more to complete the rotation. But that compression will cause us to rotate a little bit too much if we hit it with too much steering angle or with any brake input. So again, we're trying to really keep the car neutral until we get through that compression, and then we can kind of complete the corner. If we are under control as we get to that compression and start turning in more, we can get back on throttle pretty aggressively, and we can use a lot of curbing in turn 7 at the apex with our right tires, using as much of it as we can manage. For turn 8, on the exit there, we can actually dip a little bit into the grass without getting an off track, but be careful not to be too aggressive on throttle at the apex. Otherwise, it can be very easy to put your whole car into the grass, and then you're in a world of trouble. Turn 9 is a super fast corner and a really fun one, but it's tricky again because we're dealing with more elevation change, just this time we're cresting a hill instead of dropping down a dip. Still, the consequences are kind of the same. As we crest the hill, the car is going to get light, so if the car isn't neutral enough, then the rear is very likely to lose traction and it can be very easy to spin. On the flip side, if we come in with too much speed, then it's very easy to run wide here as the car gets too light. So it's a balancing act. We'll get an initial spike of brakes right around that white curbing on the right hand side, and we want to trail off pretty quickly and trail through the corner to get into a slightly later apex. We also want to get our left tires into that curbing because there is a little bit of a dip there that pulls us through the corner. That will allow us to get back on throttle pretty aggressively like we do here, and you could see even doing all of these things right, we still get a little bit of oversteer that we do have to correct. One goal that we really do want to focus on here is keeping the car smooth. That little bit of oversteer does cost us time. It does heat up the tires. The tires are already going to be very, very hot here at Oran Park, so we don't really want to roast those tires more than we have to. You should really feel like the car is smooth and kind of flowing through this corner. Turns 10 and 11 are pretty straightforward because they're easily flat out. The tricky part here is if you miss the turn 11 apex, it can be really easy to run wide into that grass and end up in the wall. So the thing you should do here is look off into the distance to those treetops, and you can kind of use those as a reference to determine whether or not you're in the correct path of that turn 11 apex and set up for a good run towards turn 12. Turn 12 is probably the most important corner on the track because it sets ourselves up for the run down the main straight and heading towards turn 1 and 2 where our best overtaking opportunity is. So a good launch out of this corner sets us up for an attack or a defense. With that said, we're prioritizing the exit, and by prioritizing the exit, we really need to make sure we get comfortable with getting as close to this wall on exit as we can. We can start braking as we get to the bottom of the hill and the car starts to compress, and we want to release those brakes as we start coming out of that compression to allow the car to get over to the apex and settle in. And we'll look to get our left tires on the apex curbing, not going too far with it, but there is a little bit of a dip that we can use there to kind of pull us through the corner. This will allow us to get back on throttle pretty aggressively, kind of stepping into it a little bit, maybe like 70, 80%, and really letting the car settle in. And as soon as we see the exit and know we can kind of add that extra 20%, we jam on the throttle and really get that nice exit, running it all the way out to the wall, very close to touching the wall. Again, the big thing here is our exit. So we really need a smooth entry and to be in control here so we can get back on throttle as early as possible on that exit. So in the braking zone, if you feel like you're getting squirrely, if you feel like you're having trouble kind of controlling the car, really focus on doing whatever you can to keep the car in control on that entry and get into the apex where we can get a nice exit. Prioritize your exit 100% here. Also, really get comfortable with brushing up against that wall. Using that little bit of extra track doesn't really seem like much in the moment, but using just that little bit of extra track and brushing up against that wall to maximize your exit will give you just a little bit of extra oomph if you're trying to attack an opponent or help you defend if an opponent is attacking you. Thank you as always for watching, for the likes, subscriptions, comments, hanging out with me on Twitch. It's twitch.tv/elgato como people. All this stuff is really helpful as I try to grow this channel. That said, one final note about Oren is just The elevation changes are really the difficult thing about this track. If you think about the dynamics of a car, when you're braking, your nose goes forward. When you're accelerating, your tail squats down and your nose is up in the air. But that's changing the weight transfer of the car. So when you start to throw elevation change in with that weight transfer, like we do here, because there's elevation change at a number of apexes, just before, just after those apexes, where the car isn't neutral, then those effects of weight transfer get amplified a bit. So just keep that in mind. If you're struggling spinning somewhere, think about where the weight of the car is and why you might be spinning. If you're braking and then turning, you're pivoting on a tire, you're dropping down in elevation change, boom, that weight transfer goes forward a little bit more. You're coming up a hill, your nose is up in the air and you start turning, things are going to get a little loose maybe. You're going to have a little bit of understeer. So consider the dynamics of the car if you start to struggle here. But anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the lap one more time. Good luck out there. I hope you have fun.